Hey, everybody. So I had a chance to go to the National Videogame Museum. They did not sponsor this video, but they are here in Frisco, Texas, where I live, which also has the Dallas Cowboys headquarters. Dude Perfect, who's also on YouTube, who's infinitely bigger than I am, but a lot of fun too. But the National Video Game Museum is here in town, or someplace that at least calls itself that. I think it's an interesting place. So I wanted to go by and have a chance to kind of share what they have with you guys. So when you walk in, you first see this place, you're like, okay, what is it going to be like? This is what you're greeted with, right? So they got all these old game systems kind of hanging up. These are functional videos, so it's not just still frame like you see here, but it's a pretty cool place. And you're kind of just from the get-go, like, whoa, this is neat. And it kind of goes on from there. So let's take a quick look. They've got these figures set everywhere throughout the museum. I didn't take pictures of all of them, but I did get a few. So, of course, you have Thorn from Battleborn sitting right there in the entranceway, which I thought was kind of neat. It's a great thing. That thing sits about 4 feet tall. It's huge. It's the kind of thing every kid looks at every okay, I would look at and go, gee, can I take it home with me? But where the hell are you going to put it, right? It's huge. There's no room for it, but it's pretty cool stuff. As soon as you walk in, you've got this list of family friendly favorites. They are fantastic. This is probably 7 or 8 feet tall and probably 5 feet wide. That thing is huge. I love it. You just walk in and boom, there it is. Off in the corner, as soon as you walk in and you turn in to the left, the first thing you see is Pong Alley. So one of the first video games to even ever hit the market was Pong, at least in wide circulation. And there were a lot of variations of it, including the first video game system I ever had at home. We actually had one of these things. It You could play I would sit here, my dad or one of my sisters would sit here, and we'd beat the ball back and forth. It was so cool at the time. But there it was in a museum, something I had as a kid. You even have arcade versions of Pong. They've got some where you would feed quarters in to play Pong in the arcades. I guess you'd put them next to the pinball machines, but yeah, they have arcade size ones, even including the world's largest version of Pong. This is 4.5 or 5 feet tall for scale. I mean, you can play this. It's playable. It's massive. I'm not sure how you would be effective at it because that's probably 2 feet across, foot and a half or 2 feet across. The knobs are massive, but it's kind of fun to look at. Again, it's one of those things guys like me look at and go, "Can I take it home with me? I'll just turn my living room into a giant Pong." Which don't tempt me. That's actually something I would do. Um, as a developer, you look at these things as a kid and you're like, holy crap, it's cool, right? But as a developer, you realize that you can't develop on what people have at home. You have to have extra access to things and the ability to kind of mess around with stuff in ways you can't do if you're just a gamer. But the game museum actually has developer systems in locked cases, right? So because they're not common. You don't see them often. There weren't a ton of these things, but they actually have. There it is, the Sega CD system that a developer would use to gain access to stuff in ways that the rest of us couldn't. Again, more developer gear for Game Boy and others, right? So this is some of the early stuff that developers would actually be working on to build the games that we all had at home. These are probably right there, 1990. They had the original Activision business plan number 9. These things were numbered when they were handed out so they could keep track of them. But there it is, the business plan as of August 23rd, 1979. It would cover September through March of 1985, but there it is in sight. They had the Bill Gates Signature Edition Xbox. I mean, this is some cool stuff, right? I mean, nobody gets one of these at home, but you had to partner with Xbox to do it. You got this Bill Gates Signature Edition Xbox, which was kind of neat. Again, I turned another corner. I'm like, holy crap! I got some of this stuff as Christmas presents for as a kid, and yeah, there it is in a museum. Stuff that I really wanted and begged for, and I had some of it. Pitfall was probably my favorite. I played that thing for hours and hours and hours. But there's a couple in here I played, and Skyjinx was fun. But yeah, Pitfall was probably the one I played more often, at least out of that set. And it wasn't just games. They don't have just games at home consoles and whatnot. They had accessories. They're everywhere in this place. And some for the 2600, some for later systems, and some I'd only ever seen in the Sears catalog, like this thing, the Super Sketch. This was designed so you can actually draw on the screen and convert it over from paper to screen. I'd never even seen one in person, but there it is. Yeah, they've got some older Halo stuff. They've got the Pickup Artist, Lounge Liver. I think it was Larry and the Lounge Lizards or something like that. But yeah, there it is. Um, the thing goes on. They even have a whole section about Easter eggs. So if you're not familiar with an Easter egg, um, sometimes developers will hide things inside a game that if you find it, it's sort of this extra little treat. But they had a whole section describing all these different Easter eggs. And some of them that turned out to be just glitches. Some of them were cheat codes where if you found the right sequence to hit some buttons in, you got, God mode on a particular game, and people would hand these cheats codes around to each other, and you had to like buy magazines to actually find out the Easter eggs so you can go off and look for them. But they were in games from the very get-go, and some of the 2600 games actually had them. So they go back a long, long way. Again, more accessories. Look at all these Atari 2600 add-ons. I completely forgotten about most of this stuff. Like the Cosmic Commander control, right? You got to like kind of point stuff at the screen. And of course, it was completely not accurate. People today would pan it and be like, oh my God, it was awful. But at the time, remember it was late 70s, early 80s. This was cutting edge stuff, man. This was fantastic. Uh, Arkanoid, I haven't seen that one in forever, but there it is. The power body control, the joy board, and early kind of get up off the couch, you person, and go off and do things in the more Wii sense. So you can see even from the dawn of the industry, people were looking at ways to innovate and how to make games much more interesting to play. And there's a bunch of examples of it right there. They even had a section of what I'm going to call the app before the app. You could get these little handhelds that ran on AA batteries that, yeah, they're absolutely horrible gameplay, but at the time was so cutting edge, we didn't care. It was something. And you carried them around with you, and you had to go ask your mom to get extra batteries, and because they ran out so fast. But man, these things were a blast. I had the football one, but the rest of these I remember seeing, but I don't ever remember playing too many of them unless a friend of mine had it. I remember I really wanted the Tron system, but it was expensive. But yeah, there it is, and live and in color. The home arcade before the home arcade, right? So these things stood probably 6 or 10 inches tall. You could get them for like 20, $30. They weren't expensive. But the screens were like that big. You couldn't, it was difficult to play, but it was better than nothing. It's better than having to go to the arcade and spend, all your whatever money you had on the machine. You could play for hours. Frogger was pretty good. A friend of mine had that as a kid, and the Frogger one was pretty fun to play. The rest of them were kind of, they were okay, but they weren't great. But Frogger was pretty cool. They had a closet full or a section full of Game Boys. I got so when I saw this, I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize there were that many different varieties of Game Boys. There was even a Barbie edition Game Boy. So yeah, it was, well, apparently an unreleased prototype, but they'd even messed around with trying to make a Barbie edition. But there they are. This was a shockingly rare edition. It was manufactured in Japan, had a couple variations, but sure enough, there it is in the museum. All for your $13 admission price for $14, I think, to get in. Then I turned another corner and I got all excited because I'm like, holy crap, there's the first computer we had at home. That my dad brought one of these home in late 70s, the TRS-80 Model 1. And you might be asking, well, where's the drive? Well, that's your storage, right? There were no floppy drives yet. It was stored on a audio cassette. You could technically get a modem for it, but there wasn't anybody to hook up to call. So yeah, it was only if you were like my dad, who was a software engineer trying to call into work to do some work from home, he could, because they had those connections. But there weren't any like for fun websites or anything at that point. So but there it is, the TRS-80 Model 1, the very first computer I ever learned anything on. We actually had our monitor was green. This one is white, but the one we had was just shades of green. Uh, for a second I was like, what is this, Sears? This was the old Atari 2600. You go to the store and try out the video game. There it is. That's the one you would test the game on to see if you wanted to buy it. And of course, as soon as you walked into Sears when you were when this was new, there'd be a line of kids just waiting to play because nobody ever actually tested on it. People just played on it, and I think there were time limits where it would shut you off after a while. But there it is, complete with E.T. sitting right there, which a game we will not discuss how terrible that was. But there's E.T., the video game that almost destroyed the home video game market. Um, I was walking around and I kept seeing these arcade games and I'm like, holy crap, that's actually real. They give you a couple of tokens when you walk in. So you can actually put tokens in and play games. For the record, I suck at Dragon's Lair as much as I ever did. I'm not bad at Battlezone, but I remember Battlezone as a kid. I played that thing as much as I can get my hands on it. Not too many arcades had it, but if you found one, I was usually over there feeding it quarters as fast as I could find quarters because that thing was fun. Uh, they even get into the video game movies, so they actually had some costuming from the Super Mario Brothers movie which is now God more than 30 years old. But I remember watching that in the theater, and now it's really hard to find. I've tried to find it a couple times. It's a tough one. If anybody has a link to that to someplace that you can get Super Mario Brothers streaming, please let me know. I've looked for that thing off and on. And also, if anybody knows where there is a functional battle zone machine, there is a spot. I would love to put it right here. So, if there's one out there that's actually for sale or somebody wants to donate to a good cause, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I would give it a good home. Uh, I didn't know this. Atari 2600 had a knockoff apparently done by this group called Key Games. That if you look at it, that's a 2600 in probably the most god awful set of colors you ever want to see. But I think they were trying to, catch people's attention. But that's okay. At the 70s, in the 70s or 80s, that would have been dope, right? But now you'd be like, oh my God, that's just hard. But there it is. They have one. Yeah, so anyway, they had board games that came out of video games. So they had Wizard of War, they had Doom, Pac-Man, Zelda. I've still got Pac-Man in a closet someplace. I'd never even seen Doom. I'm gonna have to try to find a copy of that. Wizard of War didn't look all that interesting to me, and I never was a really huge Zelda fan. I know, don't burn me at the stake. I never really cared for Zelda that much. Um, they had a room dressed up like, hey, this is every 14-year-old's fantasy, and this is the fantasy room. I don't know anybody when I was when I was a teenager who actually had a room that looked like this, but man, this was the fantasy, right? You wanted stuff like this. This was more realistic. They had a living room set up with what was probably the most realistic version of a living room from that period in time, including the VHS player that had, just knobs and old, crazy things on it. This is probably more realistic for a kid's room if a kid was lucky enough to have this stuff in there, including, if you look carefully, the VHS player that had the door broken off. Because who didn't know somebody that when you're shoving the cassettes in and out of there, the door just broke off at some point and nobody ever fixed them. Then you come around towards the end and you get to the arcade. They all of these games are functional. I stayed there for about an hour and a half playing stuff that I used to be fairly good at, that I am no longer any good at whatsoever, including Tron. And you'd think I would be because I just got one for home, the arcade one up version, but I haven't put it together yet, so I need to put it together in practice. But they had the original arcade size. They have Pac-Mania. They had stuff that was not all that easy to find. Berserk, I hadn't seen that in forever. And by the way, I'm still no good. Space Invaders, Gauntlet. Yes, I played Gauntlet. Yes, I was the wizard. And yes, I still got eaten by ghosts. But Joust, another fantastic favorite of mine from back in the day. And one last slide for everybody. Blue Shark, which I had never seen. I didn't even know. I'd never even heard of this, but I tried it anyway. The gameplay is pretty interesting. You have this controller. It's like shooting a gun, and you're shooting harpoons at the sharks. By the way, I'm not very good at it. They have Michael Jackson's Moonwalker and just line after line after line of stuff. Like I said, they didn't sponsor this ad. This was just me out having fun. They didn't sponsor this video. This was just me out having fun with some nostalgic video games. But the museum is there in Frisco, and it's not huge. You can go through it in like an hour, hour and a half. But if you're ever in Frisco and you're a video game aficionado or into the classic video games. It's just the place you got to go visit it. And I'd seen it a number of times because it's right next to the public library, and I'm always like, I should take a time and go in there. And I finally did. And I went in because figured what the hell. But I hope you enjoy this little trip down memory lane with me. The place is great. I've got a ton more pictures from it that I'll probably sneak in over time out on Twitter or one of the other feeds. But this was just sort of my broad strokes overview of holy crap. This was a ton of fun. So if you're ever in Frisco, go check them out.